The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 8th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of the Lord. So back in the days when we used to have light bulbs, or at least when we had incandescent bulbs that constantly needed changing, you may remember that there were all kinds of jokes about how many people it would take to change a light bulb. When I was in college, I was a computer science major. So we told the joke about how many computer science majors it would take to change a light bulb. The answer? None, because it's a hardware problem. We don't do that stuff. And in those days, we also used to tell the joke about how many Lutherans it would take to change a light bulb. And the answer was 10. 1 to change the bulb, and 9 to talk about how much they really like the old light bulb better. And of course, it is not just Lutherans. There are lots of people and lots of church groups that can find change difficult. Sometimes change is hard. Often, change, even the changes we want, are disorienting. And frequently, change takes effort that we just don't feel like we got the time for. And so change is often resisted. And so it's always been a bit of an irony to me that our one specifically Lutheran Church holiday, Reformation Day, celebrates change. Reformation Day is, among other things, the remembrance of the changes in the Western Church that were spurred on by Luther, beginning a debate about the sale of indulgences. And Reformation Day is, among other things, the remembrance of changes brought on by those early reformers. Although, to be fair, many of those changes were in fact about going back to earlier practices. Sometimes Lutherans would sit there and go, yes, but we talked about how clergy should be allowed to marry and laity should be given both the bread and the wine in communion. These were the way things always were in the church for over 1,000 years. So in some respects, you know that these were Lutheran reformers, because one way of looking at this is to say they were really trying to go back to the old light bulb and put the old light bulb back in. But even so, it was change. And so this day is about the fact that change happened, and that changes continue to happen, and that changes will still be happening in our future. All of our biblical readings this morning also talk about change. Jeremiah writes that the covenant with God is going to change. The days are surely coming when the law, really this word means revelation, the revelation of God, won't simply be written down on stone or on paper, but in people's hearts. Paul writes that through the death and the resurrection of Jesus, God has brought about a change in the way people should understand their relationship with God. That is, that our relationship with God is based on faith, which means trust in God's promises, and not on whether we've worked hard enough at doing what we feel God has called us to do. And Jesus promises that the truth will set us free. And that apparently disturbed people who thought they were free enough already and really didn't want or need Jesus bring in any changes that would mess with their system. Change. It has happened before, it's happening now, and it will happen again soon. Honestly, you do not need me to tell you that. You don't need Jeremiah, Paul, or even Jesus to tell you that. Change is just the way life is. And yet, what's different in these biblical texts is that God's promise is in the midst of the change. What's different is the promise that God walks with us through our changes. It's the promise that God will work changes in our lives that turn out to be good for us even when those changes are unsettling at the moment. And indeed, it's finally the promise through Jesus that God will even change our own death into eternal life. Today, as part of our celebration of Reformation change, 4 of our young people will be confirmed. And as part of their preparation, we always ask them to write faith statements. Those are statements that often describe changes in their faith as they've grown and matured. Two of them will read their statements shortly, but all of them have written faith statements about how people and places and events in their lives have helped them to grow in faith, to change how they understand God in their lives, and to set them on a course for the changes to come. Growing, of course, is itself a change. And it is fun and sometimes scary to see how fast these changes happen in our kids. But change and growth are things we all continue to do, whether we plan for them or not. And like each of our confirmands, the change and the growth that Jesus calls us to are never over, no matter how old we get. But no matter what changes we face, the promise of God's reformation in our lives is the same. It's the promise that Jesus will be walking with you no matter what changes you face. It's the promise that God will always be working for good in your life, even when you face bad changes. And it's finally the promise of Jesus' resurrection, which changes even death into life. So we'll now listen as two of our confirmands share their faith statements with us.